Hello and welcome to this podcast for the Light Review. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to like and share this podcast if you enjoyed the content. So today we interviewed David Lawrence of Dulwich Lighting and Electrical, who is an ex-lighting designer turned Sparky, which not only makes him as rare as a legal party in lockdown, but also gives him quite a unique perspective when it comes to installing lights and working with lighting designers. David, hello. It's great to speak to you. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. Good to catch up, Chris.
Yeah, it's great to see you. And John sends his regards as well.
Oh, blessed.
So I've got a couple of questions for you today, as discussed. The first of which is basically there are electricians and electricians, right? So many occupations have a broad spectrum of skill sets. I mean, designers, interior designers is one that comes to mind. How can you define whether the electrician you're employing to do the lighting is up to the job? That's one of my questions for me.
There's no simple answer to that. The electrical industry is obsessed with box ticking, but that you go through electrical exams, and once you become an installing electrician, then they sort of direct you towards getting a gold card to be able to work on certain sites and not others.
Gold card.
And to get your health and safety card. It's a box ticking exercise. So hopefully you come across someone who's interested about detail, interested about integration, interested about how things look, and can also be really, really skilled in their electrical execution. And so that, you know, it's difficult to find people like that.
Well, just for the viewers, you and I worked on a job recently, and I specifically wanted you on the job because of your background as a lighting designer. So I knew that you had a passion for lighting design in the past, but also I needed it there because I knew that you weren't going to cut any corners. And that, I mean, I just would like to know for the future, how would you go about finding an electrician who, I mean, can you go online or something? Can you say, I want an electrician for residential properties or whatever? I mean,
it's not as clear cut as that. When you become approved by one of the regulatory organizations like the NIC, EIC or NAPIT or ECA, then they don't look in that degree of detail. At most, on their annual assessment of the electrician, there'll be a box to tick that you do emergency lighting, that you do home automation. That's the extent that the annual assessment reviews on paper. So how does a homeowner find someone? It's difficult. The first step is to go on to, say, the NIC, EIC website, find an electrician. You can put in your postcode and it will flag up a number of electricians, maybe classed as a domestic installer or approved contractor. But then really it's down to the homeowner to ask a series of questions before appointing, not just, can you install these lights, love? It's can I see photographs of past work? Can I look at references? But, you know, there's a certain degree of alchemy that certainly homeowners don't know, and a lot of electricians don't know when you start to look at the finer details of how we put all this stuff together in a home. So I don't have a clear-cut answer for you, but you know, buyers beware. Homeowners don't be afraid to ask questions and look for references and samples and go and see other people's work if they're down the road, that sort of thing.
That's really good advice, actually, because there is, I think, like many professions, we're sort of likely to say, yeah, we could do that. and then worry about it afterwards. I mean, I know you can't know everything, right? So what for you the biggest challenges for electricians, specifically when approaching residential lighting projects, and how would you best advise the contractor and designers to interact with the appointed electrician just to make sure you get the best results? Because I know what I'm going to give the architect, drawings and power and all sorts of things like that, but what is going to make it gel with an electrician? I mean, are they generally interested? I mean, I suppose you can't really say that all electricians are the same, but what would make the process better from a lighting designer's perspective, an electrician's perspective?
It's all about hopefully feeling as if you're on the same journey, and respecting that you've got different skills, different skill sets. And hopefully as a lighting designer or interior designer architect, you can inspire your team to look at the detail, so that that you go through that process of translating plans, and that you know that everyone is reading the plan and understanding it. And of course, for a majority of domestic electricians, that isn't the case unless they have worked in, say, a commercial environment or new build environment, but many haven't. So they're not necessarily used to detailed plans. So it's about communication and not letting the Sparkies get away with anything, gently keeping on their backs and just making sure that they're sort of understanding what your requirements are. Of course, there's another answer to that is that you are hoping that the electrician is going to go that extra mile, because, you know, everything is put under the floorboards or in the ceiling. You don't know how it's plugged together, being a lighting designer. You don't know where the joists are, because when you're looking, starting with your plan, often the ceiling is still in play. So you want an electrician who's going to become the glue working on your behalf, that understands that millimeters matter, that working out the geography of the furniture, working out the thickness of picture frames and shadow details. Most electricians are not that obsessed. I'm afraid I am, though, because I know that finer detail makes the difference. So the more that the lighting designer can just be there and guide, the better.
There's loads of points you made there. And I mean, the one that sticks in my mind is the fact that depending on the electrician's background, he may well be completely against a lighting designer being involved, because the impression that I get sometimes is they just want to get it in and get out. You know, they've got the next job to go on.
Totally.
So there is that sort of push and pull type effect where the lighting designer wants it perfect because he's being paid a fee, right? But the electrician just wants to get it done because his fee is finishing. So it's almost like both of the things are opposites. So I guess what you're saying is that it's best to find an electrician who's worked commercially. It's best to take them on the journey and to buy into your ideas. Do you think that as a designer, lighting designer, that electricians will respond well to you telling them what you're trying to achieve in a way that isn't, you know, condescending or something, or they just go?
It comes down to personalities and your manner of working. You've got to respect what they're doing.
Oh, absolutely.
But you keep a very close eye on the things that you know as a designer can default your design. And first of all, to come back to that point, not just a commercial electrician, a commercial electrician and those doing new builds will be slightly ahead of the game in terms of understanding plans, but a commercial electrician may get totally lost in, say, an Edwardian house where it hasn't got a plasterboard ceiling, you've got lava and plast. You want a domestic electrician who understands that the plaster flakes away when you're drilling through, so you need to have a certain finesse and a certain mixture of tools to achieve that. Now, a commercial electrician won't have those skills. So again, there's a bit of alchemy here. You want someone who's actually interested in the fabric of the building and can take a brief and can take direction. So it's then down to you as a lighting designer to try and establish the right dialogue with them, so that even though that they're rushing, and they'll say, oh, no, leave it to me, that actually you're still present, giving a bit of direction.
That sounds like being on site, right? Alongside.
It does, because the bit that I've discovered that's missing often in the design to execution process is that the lighting designer, if I'm gracious enough to be able to work with one, will produce a plan, alternatively the architect, or at worst the builder. And you'll see often with the architect and the builder, they just put crosses through the kitchen, say, where they want the downlights, a row and then another row. They have no idea about what the effect might be. It's not really design, but the important point is they have no idea about integration. And it's then when the lighting designer looks at the plan and says, right, there's the electrician looks at the plan and sees that there's 4 lights to put in the ceiling, gets his drill bit out and goes straight up in the ceiling, right, 4 holes without any bearing on where the joists are, whether it's double joisted, whether the rhythm is going to work, whether the moving of the extra 200 mil or 75 mil that he's judging will have a bearing on your design.
That's really good advice. I mean, you should probably write a book on that bent. What are the biggest mistakes that you've seen made from the design to implementation? How can they best be avoided? You mentioned being on site, but I mean, lighting design, I suppose you could put in a fee as a lighting designer saying, okay, you're going to need to pay me for X amount of site visits, but no lighting designer in his right mind is going to want to be there every day, because the electrician would probably punch him, wouldn't he? After half an hour, he'd be like, get out of here.
True. So it's having that facility of being able to drop in at the right moment. So you've got to be able to judge every day or so where they might be in their installation process. And you're right, often things are done for speed, because they're used to just throwing it in, and that's the last thing that you want or the client wants. So there is no substitute.
Yeah. Unless
you work with someone like me who's thinking about, I'm not unique, but there aren't so many of us who a designer's eye, but also knows BF 7671.
Yeah, and the last client we worked with, they were very happy with your work, and it was on both aspects that I think they really felt you came good on that. So that was quite an accolade, feather in your cap, if you had a cap. Yeah, and I suppose, I mean, other jobs that I've been looking at, I've asked them, oh, your electrician, the person that put all these lights in the ceiling, these 50 lights in this tiny little room, they said to me, oh, we want to use them again. And I'm thinking, oh, no. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not sure what the best way forward for that is. But I suppose if you were to offer a simple advice to the best way to go forward when entering a project and when electricians are being appointed, would you advise lighting designers to maybe have a say in that with ones that they've worked with before? Rayco and stuff, I mean, the specific electricians, I guess that's that's another level above, isn't it? So how would you go about, is it all coming down to their websites and what they show on their websites? Or
well, certainly if when it comes into control, if the manufacturer can recommend a company, then it's best to let them have the liability.
Right.
But then you need to start ring fencing that the lighting component of a new build is to be done by this company. But I don't want to, they will have certain technical expertise, but similarly, they'll be up against the clock. And I think the finer details of design only sort of come to mind when you can reflect on what you're actually creating and discovering and building together, like Lego bricks, in the process of the build. So if you rush it, then you're going to miss all that, that you haven't quite got your cables clipped. So doesn't matter, we can put a ceiling up and forget about it. But no, if you're following BS 7671 correctly, then you need to think about premature collapse and clipping cables. You need to think about the quality of the cables you're putting in and the separation between 230-volt cables and data cables and so on, and how all that arrives at your light fitting.
So I mean, there's enough there to give yourself a light designer nightmares, because from a light designer's perspective, you just want to say, done my bit, now you get on with your bit. So, but from what you're saying, it's almost like you should maybe lose that element of trust, or have some reserve that everything's going to be done right without actually seeing it yourself. But without being an electrician, it's a bit difficult, isn't it? But from a lighting perspective, it's really about the lit effect, isn't it, that is going to be the most visible element.
Totally. But also because you are at the creative end on behalf of the client, you want the client to be happy. You don't want
absolutely,
equipment to break down 18 months into the build because the connections weren't done properly, and then for you to get it in the neck.
That'll come down to the light design,
because you nominated the lighting electricians. You know, it's a tricky one. So you need electricians who are going to not do the quickest job. And so it all comes down to that questioning of those around you and trying to inspire them to, you know, to really follow the codes and on that note, to make sure that there isn't third-party certification at the end of the job. This is critical, that those who are installing, designing, installing and commissioning the electrical part of the lighting design, lighting execution, are responsible for their own work, that they'll sign their own certificates. More often than not, at the cheaper end of the market, you've got non-qualified, semi-qualified, say, electricians doing the first fix, laying out all the cables and doing all the connections, and then employing someone like me who can certify at the end of the job just to come along and give a bit of paper. And you and I experienced that, didn't we?
Yes, that was fun. What, less fun for you than me? I mean, it wasn't fun for me at all, but for you, I think you took the client was probably in your debt for the work that you did after the interesting electrical work that was carried out in that house.
that wasn't, just to be clear, that wasn't part of the lighting electrics, which I did, but the rest of the electrics in the space. But in future, that could overlap. My main point is that you ask right up front about who's doing the electrics, what experience they've got, Have they dealt with automation? And don't be afraid to ask them questions. Oh, you're talking about Reika. Well, are you talking about one control module that's buried in the ceiling, or are you talking about a wall rack? Was it wireless? How did you integrate it? What was the category of the cable that you used? How did you find it? Ask those sort of basic technical questions, and you're judged from their response whether they're embedded in their knowledge or trying to blag it.
David, I think that's a good way to wrap up. Thank you so much for your time. I think we could talk a lot about this. I got loads of more questions, but people's attention spans don't generally last that long.
Okay.
So we'll wrap up there. Great to talk to you. Thanks very much.
And good to talk to you, Chris. Many thanks.
Bye.
Bye, John.
Thanks to David. Some real insights into his world. In conclusion, my takeaway is that to ensure the best chance of success, it's best to take everyone on the journey with you from the start, trying to establish the right dialogue and never just assume that marking some lights on a drawing is the end of the story, which as light designers, we all sort of know anyway, but it's always good to reinforce that. Thanks very much and see you again soon.